He's not even pretending anymore. Now, it should have been already clear that the US administration places little to no real, meaningful value on Palestinian life. But for those still suffering from the delusion that it does, I'll shortly go into the cynical attempts by the administration to sow those illusions. President Joe Biden has released a statement which marks 100 days since the current horror began. To be clear, the title of the statement marks 100 days of captivity for hostages in Gaza. So it's clear from the off how this is going to be framed. It talks of the 100 days of captivity for more than 100 innocent people still held hostage by Hamas. It empathizes with the horror of the plight of both them and their families and how they've been at the forefront of Biden's mind. It goes on about US diplomacy, efforts to bring the hostages home, ends with never forgetting the grief and suffering he heard when he met the families of American hostages, and reaffirms his pledge to stand with the hostages and their families. Now, to be clear, there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong, clearly, with showing solidarity with those hostages or indeed committing to bringing them home. When Hamas and other armed groups took civilian hostages, they committed a grave war crime. They should release them all. I would note that if you were designing a military operation to liberate those hostages, Israel's chosen murderous onslaught could not be a worse possible strategy on those terms. It's easier actually to forget that one of the two pillars officially of this military onslaught is to rescue those hostages, to bring them home. How many hostages have actually been freed by the military of Israel engaging in military operations? Guess. I'll tell you. One. A single hostage. The Israeli military themselves has killed far more hostages than they've actually rescued, including 3 they shot dead while they were waving a white flag and yelling in Hebrew. The hostages that have been released have been so, not because of a military onslaught, but because of prisoner release deals. And indeed, those prisoner release deals are the only clear way that more hostages are guaranteed to get released. So while in the abstract, Joe Biden is of course right to show empathy for the horror of the hostages, what they're going through, their families are going through too, and it must be unimaginable horror. Even on this point, it's an insult because he's backed and armed the military onslaught, which has done nothing to rescue them and has actually killed hostages. But the point is, he's released a statement marking 100 days of this horror, which has said zero, zilch, nada, nothing about the Palestinian people. Even on the question of hostages, and I'll keep saying this, but as the courageous Gideon Levy points out, thousands of Palestinians are held by the Israelis without charge, convicted of nothing, in barbaric conditions, suffering torture and ill treatment. That includes children who, as the charity Save the Children point out, have been sexually and physically abused. Where is that in this discussion? Now, Levy points out that it may well be the case that these prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, are treated worse than those Israelis seized by Hamas so criminally, and asks, why don't we consider them hostages too? Which of course we should. But there was nothing in Biden's statement about these Palestinian civilians being unjustly imprisoned, let alone anything else. Indeed, where in this statement is his reference to the over 24,000 Palestinian civilians now officially killed, and the 8,000 missing who are clearly buried under the rubble, and so clearly also dead, including the well over 10,000 Palestinian children who officially have been killed, and it's likely to be far more, or the over 60,000 Palestinians wounded, many severely maimed, including the 10 Palestinian children having 1 or 2 legs amputated every day, often without anaesthetic. The Palestinian civilians who are being stripped and paraded illegally in front of cameras, detained in secret locations, and subjected to torture and alleged arbitrary executions. The vast majority of Gaza's pre-war population of 2.2 million who've been driven from their homes, with most of them having their homes damaged or destroyed. Absolutely nothing to say about those civilians. The Palestinians of Gaza who are suffering extreme hunger, with 80% of the world's hungriest people in Gaza, nothing to say about them either. The mass slaughter of doctors and other medical staff, nothing to say about them either. The biggest killing of United Nations workers in such a short space of time in the history of the United Nations, nothing to say about them either. The biggest massacre of journalists in history, nothing to say about them either. Not quite true actually, not in this statement, but US Secretary of State Antony Blinken did spare a moment at the end of last year to talk about those murdered journalists. What did he tweet out? He said, "This has been an extraordinarily dangerous year for press around the world. Many killed, many more wounded, hundreds detained, attacked, threatened, injured simply for doing their jobs. I'm profoundly grateful to the press for getting accurate, timely information to people." What he didn't know in this statement is the vast majority of those media workers were Palestinians killed in Gaza, with US-supplied bombs instrumental in wiping them out. Nothing. Zero. Zilch about the people of Gaza as they are bombed, shot, starved, deprived of fresh water, of medical care, driven from their homes, their land destroyed. Joe Biden may as well have just released a statement which declared bluntly and crudely to the world, I don't care about Palestinians. And indeed, in that sense, his statement was useful because if anyone still had any illusions to the contrary, they should now be shattered, unless, I'm afraid to say, you are just completely and utterly delusional. Indeed, remember when Joe Biden engaged in atrocity denial, questioning whether the official Palestinian death toll was real. He declared, and I quote, I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. That led to the Gaza Health Ministry releasing all the names, personal details, and indeed Israel-approved ID numbers of those killed at that point. Apparently, Biden then privately apologised to a group of Muslim Americans for casting excessive scepticism over the death toll after they furiously challenged him in a meeting which was described in the media as a shit show. Apparently, Joe Biden said, I'm sorry, I'm disappointed in myself, I will do better. What's the best word to describe it here? Let's go for it, I think. Coward. He'll publicly sow doubt in the mass fatalities caused by US weapons and a military onslaught he is back to the hill, in doing so helping to ensure more are killed by muddying the waters about how murderous Israel's attack actually is and therefore undermining scrutiny. But when he's challenged privately, he does the apology he has failed to do publicly. It gets worse. 2 days ago, a piece in Axios is entitled, Biden is running out of patience with Bibi. That is a nickname for Benjamin Netanyahu, as Gaza war hits 100 days. We're told in this article that Biden and other US officials are increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu and his rejection of most administration requests related to the war. One US official says in this article, the situation sucks and we are stuck. The president's patience is running out. A Democratic Senator, Chris Van Hollen, said to be in close contact with US officials over this, says, at every juncture, Netanyahu has given Biden the finger. They are pleading with the Netanyahu coalition, but getting slapped in the face over and over again. We're told Biden hasn't spoken to Netanyahu since the 23rd of December, in which Biden said, this conversation is over, after having spoke almost every other day since the war had begun. Netanyahu had apparently rejected a US request that Israel release the Palestinian tax revenues it's withholding, and Biden is supposedly frustrated Israel isn't doing enough to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, with unwillingness to seriously discuss plans for the day after the war, and his rejection of a US plan for a reformed Palestinian Authority, whatever the hell that means, to have a role in post-Hamas Gaza. It goes on. US officials are worried Israel won't meet the timetable to move to so-called low-intensity operations in Gaza by the end of January, which they hope will mean fewer Palestinian casualties and make it difficult for Biden to maintain support. What are we supposed to make from all of this? Are we meant to go, well, good old Joe Biden has a conscience after all. Joe Biden really cares. He's doing his best, not his fault. Netanyahu and his crew are such a bunch of deranged maniacs, is it? They're not listening to him and his sage, compassionate advice. Poor old, caring Biden, who just cares too much. No, I'll tell you what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to locate the nearest sick bag and energetically throw up in it. All Biden has done, ever since this horror began and before, is throw weapons at Israel. Back it to the hill and back also lurid, groundless claims which have been used to justify massacring Palestinians, such as that he personally saw pictures of beheaded babies, which cannot be possible because, according to Israel's own official figures, one baby was killed on the 7th of October. Now, let's be clear, that's terrible enough in its own right. But it wasn't because of beheading. It was a 9-month-old shot dead in a kibbutz as her mother held her in her arms. Again, that is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Doesn't need these false claims which were used to justify killing far, far, far more Palestinian babies. Now, Biden and his spokespeople have refused to condemn war crimes, refusing to even comment on whether Israel has violated the laws that govern warfare, and denounced South Africa's case alleging genocide as baseless without even engaging with the heaps of evidence that it submitted. I have to say that evidence is overwhelming. Footnotes which go on for hundreds and hundreds, over 500. Now, twice last month, the US administration bypassed Congress to approve emergency weapon sales to Gaza, including so-called bunker-busting bombs, which are responsible for the most hideous atrocities against Palestinian civilians. Indeed, Netanyahu knows he'll always get the support of the US, whatever Israel does. As long ago as 2001, as the Washington Post pointed out long ago, he declared in a speech, which he didn't know was being recorded, I know what America is. America's a thing you can move very easily. Move it in the right direction. They won't get in the way. He also bragged about undercutting the Oslo Accords, the long-dead peace process between Israel and Palestine, in which he said, they asked me before the election if I'd honour the Oslo Accords. I said I would, but I'm going to interpret the Accords in such a way that would allow me to put an end to this galloping to the 67 borders. How do we do it? Nobody said what defined military zones were. Defined military zones are security zones. As far as I'm concerned, the entire Jordan Valley is a defined military zone. Go argue. So he admitted to playing stupid, cynical games in order to manipulate the US and indeed wreck this supposed peace plan to end the constant horror. Uncritical support for Israel has also been a major feature of Joe Biden's career, as The Intercept have underlined in their own, as ever, brilliant work. In 1986, he declared whether or not on Israel, the United States would have to invent in Israel to protect their interests in the region. A very cynical, I have to say, explanation for US patronage. As a senator, he helped drive legislation and funding which was condemned for undermining peace and worsening the oppression of the Palestinians. He long backed moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, which Donald Trump eventually, of course, did, condemned George W. Bush for being too critical of Israel. That's where we're at with Biden, and cheered on the horrendous 2006 Israeli war in both Lebanon and Gaza. Indeed, he's backed multiple Israeli onslaughts on Gaza. It goes on and on. And so there we have it. Joe Biden's administration has shown nothing but contempt for the lives of Palestinians. Occasional bits of hand-wringing are meaningless, especially when leaked to publications to try and give nudges and winks to disillusioned Democratic voters, particularly Muslim and Arab Americans, younger Americans, frankly Americans who just care about peace and, human life, that kind of thing. It's just cynical electioneering, reputational management, nothing more. This entire atrocity was made possible because of Joe Biden. He could have ended it with a phone call. He's always backed Israel to the hilt, which Benjamin Netanyahu is painfully aware of, and indeed that he can always get what he wants from the US, and that the occasional squeals of squeamishness from US administrations are completely meaningless, because they will always in practice give them the weapons, aid, and political and diplomatic support they need. The cost of all this? Well, it may well mean that significant numbers of Americans simply won't be able to bring themselves to vote for Biden, handing the White House to Donald Trump, and heralding the potential end of US democracy and even opening up the prospect of civil war. Well, if that happens, they'll try and blame the left. They always do. But have no doubt it will be Joe Biden and his allies to blame. Please like and subscribe. Do share this video. Keep the show on the road on patreon.com/ownjose84. Listen to us on the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.